Joining me now is Hannah Weisfeld, the Executive Director and the founder of Yachad. It's a British Jewish organisation which aims for a peaceful resolution between Israel and Palestine. Thank you so much for your time, Hannah. What are your reflections on what we heard from the Prime Minister today, the British Prime Minister?
Well, I mean, it's not surprising that we're attempting to remove British nationals because the situation on the ground now is extremely dangerous. As people will know, there is no way in or out of Gaza. And as things stand, there are 200 people have said that they are in Gaza, British nationals that need to come out. And there are unclear, but we think at least 10 British nationals that are hostages that are being held by Hamas, likely in the tunnels under the ground of the Gaza city.
What we've heard from the Prime Minister is that there needs to be a pause. That could be a ceasefire, it could be an arranged pause in fighting. He said, we don't know when that will be, but we will be ready to use that opportunity as and when it comes up. You know, this is going to be an extremely challenging operation to do that. And of course, concerns as well externally that might be brilliant to be able to literally rescue those British citizens, but what about hundreds, thousands of other people who need help too?
Yeah, look, I think the primary thing about humanitarian pause, which is really important that he didn't mention, is that there are over 2 million Gazans, Palestinian Gazans living in Gaza right now who are trapped there, over 1 million internally displaced people, and over 1 million of the population of children. There is not enough aid getting in. So there was another convoy of aid that came in today, but it's almost impossible to support the local population for the amount of aid that's coming through. So prior to the latest round of violence, there were over 100 trucks of aid a day coming into Gaza to serve the local population. And there's nowhere near that coming in now. You know, we had 20 trucks at the end of last week. We've had a few this week. It's a tiny number, it's a tiny trickle. And actually that humanitarian pause needs to not only allow us to get our citizens out, but it needs to allow aid to get through to millions of Palestinians that are now stuck on the ground in Gaza.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what the Prime Minister said. He said we need a pause so that we can let aid in and let Britons out. Hannah, what's your perspective really of how the Prime Minister's been handling this, which is so far support of Israel and support for their right to defend themselves, but stressing very clearly that civilian casualties have to be minimised?
Well, the very beginning, when this conflict first broke out, it was very clear that what Hamas had done is breach the borders of Israel and actually commit terrible war crimes and crimes against humanity against the people of Israel. And we've all borne witness to those pictures that have come out. Since then, that Israeli response has been very severe. It has killed over 6,000 people, over 2,000 children in Gaza. And I think it has taken the British government, and I think the international community as a whole, quite a long time to open up the space where we can talk about the fact that a war of self-defense, which is Israel is entitled to conduct, has to be conducted within the boundaries of international humanitarian law. Now, the challenge is that, as people will know from the images you've seen, Gaza is the most densely populated place in the world, and there are militants embedded in the local population. It is not simple to conduct a war of self-defense. And Hamas clearly does not abide by those rules. Nevertheless, Israel as a democratic country has a responsibility to do that. And we have seen whole neighborhoods in Gaza that have been effectively made unlivable. And there will have to be an enormous international reconstruction of the whole of the Gaza Strip when this war is over. So I think it is really crucially important that we frame the discourse around this conflict within the framework of law, within the framework of what is legal, you know, which does include Israel's right to self-defense, but also the way in which it conducts that self-defense in order to minimize civilian casualties, which are incredibly high now.
Is there any political way out of this now?
Well, I'm pleased you asked that, because actually the reason that we are in the mess that we are in now is because for 30 years, the international community has almost paid no attention to this conflict. So every so often there is a round of violence. Normally the most severe violence is actually between Gaza and Israel, as we're now seeing. We've obviously not seen anything like, you know, the scale we've got now. And the international community issues statements, condemnations, tries to involve Egypt and, you know, other players in the region to calm tensions. And when those tensions have been calmed, everybody goes back to business as usual. And the status quo is completely unsustainable. What the lesson that we have all been taught, and it's a very, very painful lesson to have been taught in this way, is that we cannot continue to treat this conflict like a thing that, occasionally is a problem that the world then turns a blind eye to. And you can see what's happening now, which is the entire international community is running around the Middle East playing kind of shuttle diplomacy, trying to stop this conflict from spilling over. Because if it spills over and Hezbollah and Lebanon become involved in it, there is a real risk that we will be fighting a much bigger war. And I'm sure people may have seen today that Iran have said that if the bombing of Gaza does not stop, they don't intend to leave the Americans out of it, which I assume is a threat to target civilians in America or American military infrastructure overseas. Yeah. So there is a real risk now that this conflict becomes much greater, much bigger, and endangers many, many more lives. So, I think that what is crucially important now politically is that, yes, we need to deal with the urgent issue. And I think it's absolutely right that our Prime Minister is calling for a humanitarian pause. But the day after this fighting ends, what we really need is an international community that commits to ending this conflict once and for all, because we cannot have the status quo, because we will be here in 2 years' time having this conversation, watching the same scenes.
Just really briefly, Hannah, just for time, because it's brilliant having your analysis. You've said the day that fighting ends. I mean, when can you imagine that would be?
It's very unclear. Israel has set a military, its military aim is to get rid of Hamas. I have no idea how possible that is. Hamas is an Iranian-funded militia inside the Gaza Strip. I don't know how you judge when that has been completed. I don't know how you do that when it's embedded in the civilian population. I suspect what is likely to happen is eventually enough pressure will be brought to bear by the international community on both parties, and the fighting will cease. The question is going to be, how many lives are going to be lost between now and that moment?
Of course. Hannah Weisfeld, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.